Okay, so this is going to be an awareness test.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? Go! The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear? Go!
All right, so a lot of you probably didn't notice that moonwalking bear the first time. I know that I didn't. I watched that video for the first time and I was completely blown away whenever I saw the second one. I watched it again and I saw that there actually was a moonwalking bear that walked through the first time. I didn't believe it. I had to go back and watch it again, but he was there. And so the whole purpose of seeing that video is the fact that when you watch that, your brain was so focused on the passes. Right, because at the very beginning it says how many passes were there, how many passes to the team in white or black, I can't remember, make. So you're counting that and you're really into it. I think it was the white team, so you were looking at all the white passes and your brain completely missed that dancing bear, even though it was out of the ordinary, even though it was kind of something odd that normally if you're watching that you would see, right? But now that is a practice to show you when you are focused on something, when you are perceiving something as a certain way, it's hard for you to notice anything else. It's hard for you to understand or believe anything else because you are focused on one thing, right? And that has to do with perception. And in a minute, we're going to talk about the selection process and how we decide on what we focus on and the whole idea of how we actually perceive things. So it starts with the selection process and it goes down to how we interpret things. But we'll talk about that in a minute. First, we are going to just talk about perception. So perception is the way that we establish meaning as human beings. So anytime that you experience anything, like right now, you watching me and doing this video with me, you are going to be perceiving this in a certain way, right? You put meaning to it. And the reason why is because our brains are like computers, or you could say a filing cabinet, and you have all these little folders that through life you have created. These little folders are called schemas. So little folders called schemas. And basically everything that you experience, you take that experience and you put it into this file folder or this schema, and you say, okay, this is what this experience is like. This is what this person is like. I mean, no matter if you're talking to somebody or if you're experiencing something for the first time, everything, okay? So you have literal folders for everything. And so when you go into a situation, say you go to a party, you walk into a party and you have gone to other parties before. So your brain goes into file folder, party folder, right? Pulls that out and says, this is the correct way to act in this situation. Or this is the way that, that parties go. This is what you do at parties, right? So that's in that folder. All right, so we'll talk about that in a minute, but now let's come back to this idea of establishing meaning. So how do we establish meaning? There's 3 stages, as you can see. The first one would be selection. So in that awareness test, you selected what you wanted to see. You selected the passes, and therefore you didn't see the moonwalking bear, right? We all select things, and that is going to make us perceive things differently. So say you and a friend go to a movie, and you are really into maybe actors and actresses and their performance, like maybe you like to act, so you're really into that. And you thought, man, all the actors did a really great job. I thought that was a really great performance. But your friend is really more into like technology, and they really like special effects, right? We'll say the movie special effects were kind of okay. They didn't really like it. So you both have watched the same movie, you have the same exact experience, and then you walk out And whenever you ask each other, what did you think about the movie? You have totally different viewpoints. You say, oh, I loved it because I thought so-and-so did such a great job in that movie. And your friend says, really, I thought it was not really that great. Like the special effects were terrible, right? You both selected, neither one of you were wrong. You just both selected different things to focus on, correct? You know, you think about different things and you focus on different things because that is what you're interested in. You have maybe past experiences in those things, right? Like I said, maybe you like to act, you have past experiences in that, so you focus on it, you select that to focus on. Maybe your friend does a lot with technology and computers, so he or she focus more on the special effects, right? All right, so that's the idea of selection. Then we have organization. So that's where those file folders kind of come into play. So once we select something to focus on, then we organize it. We place it into one of our folders, right? And so we also, the book on page, let's see, let me get my book out. So on page 31, it talks about different types of schemas that we all have. So first is physical. So say that you see somebody the first day of class, if you came to class and you met me, or even just watching these videos, if you're a virtual student, you're watching this and you're seeing me, right? Well, the first time that you see me, without even meaning to, you just kind of organize me in a way. So you might notice my physical quality. So that's going to be obviously just my appearance, what I look like, maybe how I dress, right? All those things, and your brain categorizes that. And it says, okay, this is, and in a way, it's a little bit how we kind of stereotype people. Not stereotyping people is not always bad. Sometimes it's helpful to help us be able to communicate better. It's just whenever we take it to an extreme and we don't allow people to maybe not fit in a bubble, right? We just put people in a bubble or into a folder and we say that's just how you are, and maybe it's not the case. But sometimes it can be helpful. It helps your brain just be able to know how to communicate right off the bat with somebody. So the first one might be physical. You take all that in. The second thing is role constructs. So you're going to look at maybe, all right, I'm in this class. This is obviously my teacher. And so you would pull out that folder for role constructs. I communicate with my teacher in this way because in the past, I've been taught how to communicate with an instructor. You know, you've learned over time how to do that. And so because I have a particular role and your brain has categorized that or organized that, right, you will communicate with me in a different way than maybe the student sitting next to you. Then you have interactive constructs. So that is talking more about, let's see, how is the person acting appropriately? You know, whenever there's maybe somebody in class that's acting kind of weird, or if you've ever experienced a situation where someone just isn't doing what you think is appropriate for the situation, it makes you kind of feel weird, right? It kind of makes you like, oh, I don't really know what to do right now. That's because your brain doesn't know how to organize it, right? It's kind of that's where you get that, like, I don't know what to do with my hands kind of feeling. Like you feel very awkward because the person that is doing the weird or different action in that situation is making your brain think, I don't have a folder for this. This doesn't match. It's like your brain's sitting there going, it doesn't match my folder. I have nothing in here that matches that. So then it doesn't know what to do. It doesn't know how to act. Right? Okay, so then we look at psychological constructs. Then this is where you're looking at what's the person's mood. So say I come in every day into class and I am very happy, I'm very warm, I talk to you, I'm always asking questions, doing all that. And then one day I come in and I'm not smiling. Well, I guess you won't really normally be able to see because I have my mask on at the plant right now. But say I'm not smiling and I'm kind of short and a little bit rude, and anytime you ask a question, I kind of just blow it off. Your brain would think, well, this doesn't match the folder that I have for Miss Peters. But if I come in the next day and I'm happy and warm again, then your brain's like, okay, that's normal again, starts putting back information. However, now it has a piece of paper in there saying, but sometimes Miss Peters can be kind of moody, and when she acts like this, and maybe I should communicate with her like this on those days. Okay, so that's organization. Schemas. When you think organization, think schemas or file folders in your brain's little file cabinet, or you can think of it as a computer as well. Okay, so then we have interpretation. So now this is where we get to the point that two people can experience the exact same thing and have completely different views on it. They can perceive it completely different because you have different interpretations. when you assign meaning to something, again, this has everything to do with your past experiences, how you saw things in the past, or what you've learned about the world in the past. So I'm going to scroll down real quick. So I have these selection things. So like I said a second ago, I'm going to go through this real quick. Okay, so selection, this is how we experience what we select to focus on. We choose certain stimuli over another. Also, one of the things that we need to know about the selection process is the fact that when you are selecting things to focus on, your brain typically does it in a few different ways. So first of all, it's going to select things like unusual stimuli. So if you see something odd or that your brain's not expecting, that is going to make your brain focus on it, right? So it says like professor at the gym. So say you see me at the gym, right? You've only seen me in class, and all of a sudden you're working out and you just see me. That's going to be, your brain's going to notice that. Right? So you're like, oh, that's my instructor. That's all. I've never seen her before here. Or just the fact that like, oh, I know her in a different situation and I don't really know how to communicate with her here outside of class. Okay, then you have mundane or repeated. So say I wore the exact same thing every single day, right? So every day I am coming to class and you just start noticing, your brain will notice that. Like, it's like, okay, she's wearing the same, and that's what you will focus on. You'll focus on the fact that I'm wearing the same thing. Or say that you live in an apartment and there's the same bird that comes and chirps on your little balcony every single day, right? You're going to notice that same bird that's the same bird that comes over. Your brain will focus for it and even sometimes look for it, right? And then the last one is intense stimuli. So if you hear something really loud that either startles you or anything, your brain's going to pay attention to it. So a good way to think about this is growing up, I had a clock. My parents had a clock that chimed every 15 minutes. Okay, I mean, that could be very annoying to some people. I didn't even notice it because I heard it for so long. Well, my friends who stay the night would always hear it and think like, oh my goodness, what is that sound? Because it was weird to them. All of a sudden out of nowhere, you'd hear just music playing all the time. And that was weird. Or if I was staying at my grandmother's house, she lived right by a highway. When we went to bed at night, all I could hear was the cars going on the road, or hitting that little like those grooves on the side of the road, like they kind of swerved a little bit, or honks or whatever. That's all I could hear. Whereas my grandmother didn't hear it at all because she was so used to it. So that just shows you how your brain will select certain things if it's intense or it's different. Another way might be like my husband really likes to watch like war movies, and he likes The Patriot. I can't watch The Patriot because all my brain focuses on is the gore. Like, I can't notice the storyline. I just see like when people's legs get cut off or something because they got hit by a whatever those things are called, those big things that shoot black balls in the air, whether it's cannons. So like that's all I can see, right? But he can appreciate the storyline because he's not really paying attention to that. But the gore is an intense stimuli to me. All right, so that is selection. That's how we select things to pay attention to. Now there we go. All right, so organization. So like I said before, you're going to organize all your information every time you go into an experience. You put things like you put them into schemas. And so it says, for example, here's someone talking. So that's a stimuli that you selected, and then you organize it. So if you hear my voice a lot because you are in my class. Say you're at Starbucks and you're getting coffee and you hear someone talking on the phone behind you. Your brain is going to say, oh, that's Miss Peters. Without even seeing me, you might recognize my voice because your brain has organized that sound and put it in a folder, in Miss Peters' file folder or my schema, right? So you're going to turn around and go, oh, hi, Miss Peters, or at least I hope you would. But you would turn around and say, hi, Miss Peters, because you would know my voice. Your brain has organized that. Is like it says, is it familiar or unfamiliar? You're going to recognize that. Or then is it pleasant or annoying? Obviously, like your brain also, if you hear something that's very annoying to you, you're going to pay attention to that, and your brain's going to organize that as annoying. And so every time you hear it, it's going to kind of get on your nerves and like make you on edge, right? So say if you hear a baby crying when you're out to eat, that might be something that's all you can pay attention to, right? Because it's a very loud sound. It's something that maybe you're not really accustomed to hearing. So your brain is going to organize that as something kind of annoying, and you're going to be focused on it. Okay, so now we're going to go, sorry about the pictures. I'm not going to go through the pictures. We're not gonna worry about that today. But anyway, so we're gonna do interpretation. So finally, we put meaning with stimuli. Do I want to know more about this voice? So this is where you kind of interpret it. You're kind of deciding, do I like it? Do I not? Maybe like how you, this also is something that can change though, right? Through time, over time, it can be different. So for me, a long time ago, before I had a baby, I used to be kind of, I would hear a baby crying in a restaurant and I would think, oh, you know, like, make your baby stop crying. It would annoy me. Now, when I hear a baby cry, I have a totally different interpretation of it. I have this whole like, oh, where's that baby at? I hope that he or she's okay. You know, it's a whole different interpretation. Instead of categorizing it as annoying, I categorize it as like empathetic. Like I'm thinking, oh, I want to help them. Where's that baby? That poor thing. That's a whole shift, right? So I used to apply meaning in one way, and now it has shifted because of my experiences. I interpreted it a different way. So again, this has to do with your past experiences. It also has to do with your ideology. So remember we talked in our last chapter about ideologies. That's kind of like our core values, our worldview, the way we perceive the world. And that's going to also have to do with that. And then gender perspective, or really any type of perspective that's going to be, like gender perspective is talking more like, you know, we talked about gender last class and how that's a socially constructed idea. Basically, you could say any of our demographics, right? Any of our age demographic, or our race demographic, or our ethnicity, or you name it, whatever it is, you get that, and that can also influence our interpretation of the things that we encounter. All right, so that's how we do things. Now we're going to talk about, or how we perceive. So now we're going to talk about perception and attributions. So whenever you experience someone's actions towards you, you have two ways that you can organize that and interpret it. So you can either think of things in an external attribution way, which means that you think of external factors coming into play, or you can look at someone's actions internally through internal attributions, and you can think it's something like inward motivation. Okay, so let me explain that in like an example. So say you come to class late and I see you walk in, you come sit down. I can take that two ways. One, I can perceive that through external attribution. So I can say, I can assume that you were probably late because of external factors. Like, oh, who knows, maybe there's really bad traffic. Maybe there's a wreck. Maybe they had someone that drops them off and that person was late. Right? It's like I'm basically giving you the benefit of the doubt. I'm not assuming that your actions are in any way focused or targeted at me. Right? So then the opposite way I can look at this is internal attributions. I can assume that it's some kind of behavior inwardly about you. So like maybe when you come in late, I assume that, oh, they're just doing that because they are bad at time management, or they don't care about my class, or they're just being rude. Or, you know, or I can just assume things about you that might not be true, right? So that kind of leads us to this idea of what we call fundamental attribution error. And so fundamental attribution error is the idea of really putting a lot of emphasis on internal variables instead of understanding and thinking about external variables. So say that you are texting your friend and you can see, say that you both have iPhones and you text that person and you can see that they got your message, and then but yet they didn't open it because they have their read receipts on, so you know if they open it or not, right? Or maybe they open it and then they don't respond, and you're like, why are they not responding? I text them at 10 o'clock this morning and they haven't texted me back, and then they text you back that night at like 9 o'clock. And you're mad, like you've just thought all day, this person's ignoring me, they opened my text message, and you're just coming up with all these things. Maybe they're mad at me, I don't know. And then your friend texts you back and says, hey, I'm so sorry. I ended up having to work a double shift. And after I read your text, my phone died. I just got home and my phone just turned back on. What's up? And then you think, oh, that was silly, right? Like you're like, oh gosh, I'm sorry. I was thinking you were ignoring me, right? Like, okay, so an example of this was I had a boyfriend in 9th grade. And I went to North Little Rock, and you could not have your phones out at North Little Rock. Like if you had your phone out, you got caught, you got to take it away, and you couldn't get it till Friday. So I'm in class, and my boyfriend at the time went to another school. So apparently at their school, they could just text all they wanted to during class. I don't know. So he was texting me all morning. This is third period. I think I was in biology. I obviously was not looking at my phone because I had, I think, like English, math, and then biology in the morning. So that was a rough morning. But I was taking a lot of notes. I'm not trying to check my phone. So I'm in the middle of biology. My teacher steps out for a second. So of course, like everybody else, I checked my phone. And I had all these text messages from my boyfriend. And he was getting so mad at me because he's like, why are you not answering my text messages? And blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking, dude, I'm in class. So of course I texted him at lunch and I was like, man, I'm in class in the mornings. I can't just check my phones. Already what he was doing was he was putting so much emphasis on internal variables, assuming that I just didn't want to talk to him for some reason. That is fundamental attribution error, right? That relationship obviously didn't work out. I think we broke up like that weekend because I just thought, you know what, I can't handle this. So whenever we want to be a competent communicator, we want to think about, you know, am I putting way too much emphasis on these internal variables? Am I assuming too much about this person? And am I allowing it to bother me too much? Okay. All right. Influences on perception. So that was kind of how, and then like, you know, the way that we do it. Now this is what influences us. So physiological states versus traits. Physiological states are more like states of being at a time. So the states can change. So like for me, I am a person that if I'm hungry, I don't perceive things as well. I'm probably a little bit more snippy, right? Like being really hungry for me isn't a good thing. I can't think straight. But then there's also the idea of being really tired. If I'm really tired, I can't perceive correctly. I can't really think straight, right? But those things can change. I can get food and I can sleep. And then maybe my way that I think and my perception changes, right? I have maybe a bit more of a happy mood and a happier perception. Like I'm looking at everything more positively because I'm in a good mood. So physiological states can shift and change. And that has an influence on the way we perceive things. Then there are traits. And so traits are more lasting, enduring things about us. So a trait might be something like if you consider yourself a morning person, like an early bird or a night owl, or what the book calls a hummingbird, basically people who kind of have spikes through the day, effectiveness or awake alertness kind of thing. I'm more of a night owl inherently, but I'm trying to become, I feel like maybe I'm like a blend of a hummingbird and a night owl. I would really like to be a early bird, but I'm still working on that. But you see how that's a trait because that's more of an enduring quality about me. Like my body wants to be a night owl. It wants to be, but I'm having to slowly work on becoming an early bird, which would require me to go to sleep early every single night. That's a commitment to try to change a trait about yourself. But our traits and the way that we are more inclined can also have an influence on our perception. Then, of course, our culture, we talked about that last class or in our last chapter. Culture obviously has an effect on our perception because how you were raised and what you know to be right or wrong is going to be something very much so that influences your interpretation of something, right? Physiological influences or psychological influences. So this is going to be, hold on, let me go to that real quick in the book. Okay, so then we have psychological. And so this is going to be like what I was talking about earlier with stereotyping. So we have these certain ideas about people or things, and we stereotype something. And a little bit of stereotyping, like I said, is okay because it just helps us understand how to communicate better. But assuming that somebody or something is going to be a certain way because of these particular reasons and not allowing that shift at all to happen within our brains about like maybe it won't be like this or that person won't be like that. If we categorize them too much, that's not good. So we want to avoid that when it comes to stereotyping. All right, so then we have primacy effect and recency effect. So this is the idea of, are you more of a first impressions person or are you a like the most recent impression? So a good way to look at this would be like an interview. Say you go into an interview and you sit down to be interviewed, but actually, so let's rewind that. So you're having an interview and you're late to the interview. Okay, so you are running in there, maybe there's a wreck on the interstate and it ends up taking you an hour to get somewhere that should have only taken you 30 minutes. You get there, you're frazzled, your like clothes are all wrinkly, and you run into the interview 5 minutes late, and you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, there's a wrangle, and you sit down, and you're like, okay, I'm ready to start when you are. All right, and then they ask you the first question, you kind of fumble over that one because your brain's still kind of spinning because you're nervous about the interview and that you were late, and it takes you a little bit, but then maybe after 2 or 3 questions, you get in your group, and then you start doing really well in the interview, and you answer all the rest of the questions wonderfully. So then you leave, and the 2 people that are interviewing you start to discuss. Well, one person is a primacy person, and the other one is a recency person. So the primacy person would say to the other, you know what, I don't think that's the right person. Like their first impression wasn't great. Like, you know, they were late. Their clothes were all wrinkly. They seemed really flustered. I don't know. I just think we should go to someone else. Well, the recency person would say, well, actually, you know, once they got into the interview, they started doing really well. Like I really loved all of their answers. Why don't we just give them another shot and do this again and do a follow-up interview just to see, because I think they have a lot of potential. So you see, these are the 2 different thoughts. Some people are very much first impression based. The other is like, I'll give you more chances. So we don't want to, I mean, it's okay in some ways to do the whole first impression, because, you know, when you study interpersonal communication, we talk a lot about how first impressions really do matter. And without even realizing it, the first time you meet anybody or see somebody, you have 7 seconds. 7 seconds before that person makes a judgment in some way about you. And you do the same thing. We all take about 7 seconds and our brain sums up what we think about a person, good or bad. Right? So in some ways you want to be aware of that primacy effect, and you want to do your best to make a first impression. But also you should be able to give people the benefit of the doubt if for some reason maybe they don't make the best first impression, but they are obviously trying to do better. Right? So that's kind of the difference between primacy effect and recency effect. Now we have positivity bias or negativity bias. So this is kind of if you see things negatively or positively. So a good example of this would be this past weekend, I was going to eat with my husband's family. And for some reason, there was a mix-up in communication. We didn't know that we thought we were going out to eat at a Mexican restaurant. And so my husband and I had kind of planned out, you know, whenever you have an idea of what you're going to eat and then you're like focused and you know what you want and you're excited about it. So I had this whole positivity bias about Mexican food. I was excited. We were driving there. I knew what I was going to get. I was going to get a margarita and some chicken enchiladas, and I was so excited. So then we get there. We don't see our other family's car, and so my husband calls his family. Oh, come to find out, we're supposed to go to a steak place. We switched because it was for his sister's birthday. So they're like, oh, let's go to a steakhouse. We didn't realize that, and we think, you know, you would think you get really excited, like, oh, we're going to go get steak. But husband and I were both like, oh man, really? I really wanted a margarita, right? Like we were really excited about that. And then we had to go to get steak, and you know, we had a nice bottle of wine. It was super nice. And on a normal basis, I would see this as a wonderful dinner. But for that particular day, all I could see was the negative. Like, I really don't like this one. I don't really want this. The steak is okay. It's cold in here. You know, I was just being like a Debbie Downer the whole time. And I mean, not to them, but in my head, I didn't say that, but in my head, I was thinking it the whole time. Everything was negative. I was so unhappy about it. And afterward, I got done, and I thought I was just totally negative about that whole experience. You know, like it was like no matter what, I couldn't make myself happy about it. And I decided I don't want to be that kind of person, right? So that is the same thing here, positivity bias versus negativity bias. You might want to do something, so you only see the positive about it. But say one day you don't want to do that same exact thing, you're going to see all the negative things. And sometimes we know people like that who just kind of live in that negativity bias mentality, like everything's bad, everyone's out to get me, that kind of thing. And sometimes people just want to be negative. But we have to, when it's us, we have to be aware that we're doing that and decide, okay, I'm going to change that perspective. I'm not going to be the person that only perceives everything negatively. I'm going to try to see things more positively, or see the positive side of this as well. And then we finally have egocentrism. And so this is the fact that like all of us, and inherently we like to not necessarily just talk about ourselves, but like to be involved in the conversation or like to share about our experiences. It's very much like deep down, part of us likes making us the topic of conversation. Not necessarily that we like to be the center of a conversation. We just like being able to talk about ourselves. But when you're a kid, eventually you have to learn, I have to listen to others. I have to be willing to hear other people's stories and not always talk about myself. And you grow and you learn about that and you get better at it. But then there's some people who mentally just cannot do that. They are very focused on themselves, and they view their perception of the world or their worldview as the correct viewpoint, and nobody else's can be correct, right? No one else can have a correct way of thinking if it's different from mine. That would be an idea of egocentrism. And we want to not do that, right? We want to understand that, yes, we have a particular worldview, but we have that because of our past experiences, because of the way that we perceive it. Just because we perceive it this way doesn't mean that other people have to, or that we're even completely correct, right? But the whole idea is perception becomes our reality, right? How you perceive the world becomes your reality, but you have to be able to listen to others and maybe change your perspective some. Egocentric people cannot do that. So we want to avoid being egocentric. Okay, so then perception and the self. So perception and the self affects communication. So this is talking about self-concept. So kind of like our self-image. How do we view ourselves? And this, we've been talking up to this point about how we perceive the world, the things around us. Now we're going to talk about how we perceive us. So there are several ways that we do that. Let me get to that part. All right, so it's shaped. The first thing we need to know is that our perception of ourselves is shaped by others. And before you say like, no, like I don't care what other people think, it's not necessarily that you care what other people think. It's that we, without realizing it, when we communicate with other people, we notice how they behave towards us, how they communicate with us, and we start to morph and shape and think of ourselves in a certain way based on what they say or their reaction towards us, right? Like we start to understand that, and that becomes part of our identity. You've also probably heard people saying like, oh, speaking, like don't speak something over them or speak something over them, if you ever heard that before. That's basically just saying when you tell like a child, hey, you're good at something. Hey, you're really good at basketball. They'll probably start becoming even better at basketball because you told them that now has become some part of their self-concept. So now they want to do it, right? So one of the things, this can also work the opposite way. Growing up, I struggled with dyslexia, but I didn't really know that I had dyslexia because my mom never really talked to me or told me about that. So my mom was educational examiner for Little Rock School District, meaning she helped kids and helped them figure out their best learning style and how, like, kind of make learning plans for people. Well, she knew that I was probably a little dyslexic, but she didn't want to speak that over me because, or tell me that, because she didn't want that to become part of my self-concept. Like, I am not good at English because I'm dyslexic. She didn't want me to just start thriving on that. So I struggled a lot, especially I remember in 8th grade and 9th grade specifically, when we had to start reading out loud a lot more. I was always really embarrassed because when it get to me, I might stumble over words, or if I could tell which paragraph, I was going to read, I'd look ahead and I would just kind of almost memorize that paragraph so I would know I would say it right. Or there was another time I got asked to speak in front of the whole school, just like my principal just said, hey, can I have you speak real quick, and gave me a card and was like, hey, read this to the school. And I had like 2 seconds to read the first 2 lines and get that right in my head. Well, and then I just had to just go and read it. And I ended up just doing terribly. It was awful. But over time, I just really wanted to work on that. I just kept thinking, I don't want to do this forever. When I became a teacher, at first I was really nervous to run on the board because I didn't want to misspell words. I didn't want to read to my students because I was scared that I would stumble. And finally, I just told myself, hey, you know what? You just got to do it. And the more you do it, the better you're going to get. So I did it and did it and did it. And now 7 years later, I'm a lot better at it. And I was talking to my mom about this a couple of years ago. And I said, I always struggled with this. And my mom said, yeah, that's because you were a little dyslexic. I thought, Mom, why didn't you tell me I'm dyslexic? And she said, because what would you have done if I had told you that? You would not have conquered this the way that you have. I knew that you could do it, and it wasn't enough. Like, you weren't just full blown. Like, you just had a little bit on the spectrum of that. So I knew that you could work through it. If it had really been an issue, I would have helped you, but I knew you could do it. And so I was thankful to her that she didn't make that part of my self-concept so that I could work through it and move forward. So we want to understand that sometimes when we attach ourselves to something that someone else has said, either good or bad, we might be like that or we might not be like that. We have to be aware of that we're allowing someone else to shape ourselves. And sometimes that's good. I'm not saying it's bad to have someone shape who you are. but you want to be aware of that. Then you have it's multifaceted. So, all right, so whenever we are looking, the same concept of it's shaped by others, you have to think of it being, okay, I'm going to go ahead and pull up this real quick. So this image right here, the process of self-concept. So it's multifaceted. It's constantly changing, morphing. Basically, you don't have just one self-concept, right? You have lots of little self-concepts that make up one self-concept. I think of it like as a, like you see one body, right? It's not just one solid body. If you picture like a shadow of a human, it's not one shadow, right? It's like lots of little shadows making a shadow. Or if you've ever seen one of those pictures that's like lots of little pictures that make an image, that is what self-concept is. It's not one self-concept. It's lots of little self-concepts that that arise due to the situation, the people we're talking about. Sometimes we might show more of our professional side. We might show more of a outgoing side. It just depends on the situation. So you can see through this process of self-concept. Self-concept leads to behavior, right? And then when we act something out, and then that goes to actual response of others, how people respond to that. And then their perception, we perceive their responses, and then that goes to our self-concept, right? So as how we act, someone acts or says something towards us based on our behavior, we perceive that response, and then that again, that applied, that's how we start morphing our self-concept, or we start shaping it, right? So that's that same thing of what I just told you about, just me being a little dyslexic, you know, my behavior. My mom saw my behavior, how she responded to it. She did not tell me that I was maybe struggling with dyslexia. And so I didn't perceive that aspect. So then that didn't apply to my self-concept. So you see how it's multifaceted, and how all these different experiences and all these different communication moments that we have can constantly be shaping our self-concept. Okay, so it's multifaceted. Another aspect of being multifaceted is the fact that when we communicate things, there's different things that we communicate and why, and sometimes we know why we do it, sometimes we don't. But when we communicate things about ourselves or about our self-concept, there's things like that's known to self, right? So known to self versus known to others. That means right here, that means those are topics that are open. Like we'll share those things about ourselves to people. Then there's not known to self and known to others. So something like, you know, when I think really hard, I tend to bite on my lip. I didn't notice that. I didn't know that. But my friends and my husband, they noticed that about me, and they told that about me. I was blind to it. I didn't realize it. Or maybe we have a certain way that we act in particular situations that people around us know about us, but we're not really aware of it. And then there's known to self, but not known to others, and that's hidden. So this is stuff that we know about ourselves, but we technically don't really want you to know about it. We don't share or show that side of us to you. And again, this might be with certain people you show things and certain people you don't, right? So maybe you act one way with your grandparents, and maybe then you act a different way with your friends, right? So there's different aspects of yourself. And then there are the unknowns. So this might apply to future situations, or maybe some things that you're experiencing that other people don't really know about you, but you're still working out yourself. You don't really understand, like if you're dealing with anxiety, maybe you don't know why you're experiencing anxiety, but other people don't know you're even experiencing it, right? So that's kind of, this is the unknown. This is the part that we either haven't experienced it or we're experiencing, but we can't really communicate or articulate yet. Okay, so then we go on to face work. So I'm going to try to speed up because we only got a few minutes left, but face work, this is the behaviors that recreate positive perception. So we are constantly, like I said, in every situation, we change a little bit, not in a bad way. We're not two-faced. We just have different aspects that we show. And we have all these faces that we want to show people. So fellowship face has to do with wanting to be liked and wanting to make friends and all that. So, but whenever you're communicating, you do things to save that fellowship face. So for me, I used to be what people call like a people pleaser. I've been working on that because I used to say yes way too much to too many things. And so I've been working on it. But one thing that I really want to do is I really want people to know that I'm nice and that I want to be their friend and I want to make them feel like they're important to me. So to save that fellowship face, I'm constantly smiling, saying thank you, talking to people, waving, doing those things. That's part of my fellowship face. Then there's competence face. So this is where we want people, hold on, I want to mix these two, that autonomy and competence are kind of close together. So competence is the effort to promote our expertise on subjects to others so they respect us. So say you're in a workplace and you may all of a sudden act very professional, and that is your competence face. You're wanting to show that you know what you're talking about. I have a competence face when I'm teaching. The way that I teach, like right now, the way I'm communicating, the way I'm acting, my body movement, all of it is different from a one-on-one conversation, because right now I'm showing my competence face. I want to show you that know what I'm talking about, right? So then there's autonomy face, and autonomy has more to do with, let me read that one too, the perception that we can do things on our own and our desire to avoid others making decisions for us. So that means we want people to know we know what we're doing, right? So a good example of this is I hate when people tell me that I should turn, like my husband tells me this all the time. Say I'm going to a turn and I'm about to hit my turn signal, and then my husband goes, oh, turn left here. Flies all over me. I'm like, I know, I'm about to turn, I'm about to do it. I know what I'm doing. And at first, and he, of course, he says, well, why does it matter? I mean, I was just making sure you didn't miss it. It wouldn't bother me if you told me to turn left, but it bothers me because it's a face threat against my autonomy face. So what is a face threat? That's behaviors that threaten our identity. So when people say or do something that make us feel maybe embarrassed about something, or like what I just said, my husband telling me to turn left when I knew to turn left, that is a face threat because I want him to know I already knew to turn left at this turn, right? And so I want him to know I'm good at directions. I know what I'm doing. And he is threatening that in my brain. So that's why I do the next thing. Image management. I tell him, I know what I'm doing, right? And I'm trying to save face. I'm trying to show them that, hey, I tell him, I know what I'm doing right now. You don't have to tell me because of my autonomy face, right? I know what I'm doing. So anytime one of our three faces has a face threat against it, we immediately go into image management mode. We try either through the words that we say, how we communicate back to that person, like we might start making excuses or try to tell them how we feel about that. Or maybe it might just make us the way our behavior might change, right? So image management is just about trying to save face, if you could say it that way. Okay, so self-monitoring. So I think this is the last, yes. So self-monitoring, we'll end on this one. So self-monitoring, low self-monitors do not think before speaking. So if you're a low self-monitor, you probably are that person that might just say, hey, I just say what comes to mind. Don't mean it to hurt your feelings. I just say it. That's a low self-monitor. My grandmother is a low self-monitor. She will say stuff and I'm just like, oh, right, that I just am embarrassed about. Then there's high self-monitors. And those are people who are very aware of what they're talking about. They think a lot about it. They think about how people perceive our message. My husband is very much a high self-monitor. He thinks a lot about what people are going to think from the words that he says. So both are kind of extremes. We want to find a happy middle, right? We want to find this idea of being a competent communicator as a balance of spontaneity, being able to just talk, and then also being cognizant, being thoughtful about what you're going to say. There's situations you can just talk, and there's situations where you need to think before speaking, right? And so just the very last thing that we can talk about is just here, as you're getting ready for speaking and as you're getting ready to do a speech in this class, I want you to think about how you perceive your speaking ability. You have a certain perception of yourself that other people do not perceive. You might be nervous, they don't know that, right? So you want to think about that. So what is, is this really something that I should be anxious about? Really, everyone just wants you to do well. So I hope that if you're getting nervous about speaking, you won't be too nervous and that you'll understand that the way you perceive yourself is different from how other people see you, and they perceive you a lot more positively than you probably perceive yourself.